Imagine you and some of your friends are traveling by plane to what you think will be a holiday to remember, but it turns out to be the opposite. The plane drops through the sky, luggage fall from above. The next thing you know is that you're freezing cold. Still fastened to your chair in a part of the plane that broke off, you crash into the earth, but miraculously you're still alive. You don't know it yet, but you have landed in one of the most unforgiving environments known to men. There is nothing but mountains around you, no vegetation, no animals, nothing. You're at least alive, but soon you'll be hungry. It won't be long now until your friend tells you, "I'm gonna eat the pilot." As unbelievable as this sounds, is exactly what happened. Okay, so let's start from the beginning of the story. It's on October 12, 1972, a Thursday. Friends who play on the same rugby team from Montego, Uruguay are on their way to a match in Chile. There are 45 of them on board the plane, not only the young, strong and fit players, but some of the team's family members, as well as some supporters and 5 crew members. It's expensive to fly commercially to Chile, so they opted for the cheapest option, which in this case was chartering an Air Force plane. All they know now is the cheapest way to fly over the Andes mountain range to play what will be a fun game of rugby in Santiago. The atmosphere is fun, the rugby ball is being thrown around the plane. It's all laughter and games. One of the players gives his window seat up for his friend, so he could get a better look at the mountain. He has no idea that this small gesture will end up saving his life. At first, no one takes it seriously, but then someone points out that the mountain seems to be very close to the plane, like right outside. What they don't know is that the pilot and co-pilot have made a terrible mistake. They told the air traffic controllers that they would reach the airport in a minute. They couldn't see more due to the clouds, and they were wrong about that minute. They were actually 11 minutes away. They were still in mountains and hadn't reached the safe spot where they could turn right towards the airport. They descended anyway and were hit by more turbulence as they were right in the middle of mountains where the wind were chaotic. The plane was thrown around and the pilot saw a black ridge directly ahead of them. The plane attempted to pull up and accelerate, and now the passengers knew they were in trouble. The aircraft hit the ridge, tearing off the rear of the plane and sending the plane hurtling forward. They were about 13,800 feet above sea level when they likely collided with another mountain, causing the wings to come off and leaving just the front part of the fuselage. Those at the back of the plane have been thrown out of the mountain range. Suddenly, what's left in the plane is a snow-covered mountain. The fact that even this much of the plane survived is incredible. But what is even more incredible is what happens next. The plane begins sliding down the mountain like a sled, but somehow doesn't collide with any rocky outcrops or boulders. Sliding down and down the mountain until it comes to a stop at 11,710 feet above sea level. Trees have been uprooted and bodies have been bashed against the front of the pilot's cabin. People are strewn everywhere, but many of the passengers have somehow survived. Out of 45 passengers aboard the plane, 12 of them died immediately when the plane hit mountains or fell out of the back of the destroyed aircraft. Some bodies are found still strapped to their chairs, covered in snow and not far from the crash site. The first night is brutally cold, with temperatures getting as low as -22 degrees Fahrenheit. The survivors huddled into the fuselage and tried to block up the holes with suitcases. They all mistakenly think that a rescue operation will find them and this will be their only night on the mountain. They could not be more wrong. What they don't realize is that the plain white coloring means that it cannot be seen from the air. The pilot is dead. The co-pilot who made that terrible mistake is found crushed under debris but alive. He tells the survivors that he has a handgun and asks them to shoot him and put an end to his pain. But they didn't kill him, but later he died. But now they need food. At high altitudes in such cold temperatures, the body burns calories extremely fast in an attempt to stay warm. All of the luggage is searched, and while there is an endless stock of cigarettes and lots of books. In total, there are 8 chocolate bars, a tin of mussels, 3 jars of jam, a tin of almonds, some candy and a few bottles of wine. The survivors immediately made a rationing plan. It's next to nothing for so many people and they have no idea for how long it needs to last for them. They have water at the very least, being able to melt it and funnel it into an empty wine bottle. Days passed and more died. It still gets worse because they then heard on a transistor radio that they had found in the wreckage that the search for them was being cut off. They knew they were alone, cold and starving. It was at this point of extreme desperation that a guy named Nando told his friend, "I'm going to aid the pilot." In fact, a few of the survivors had been running the same idea over in their minds. Then they started with the pilot, stripping the bodies of the possible meat including the organs as their starving brains told them, "Eat more, eat everything, don't waste a bit." On day 17, disaster struck again. In the middle of the night, they heard a noise, what one of them later described as sounding like white horses running at them. It was an avalanche. Snow burst through the hole in the plane and the entire fuselage was packed tight. Those alive scrambled to dig for air and their friends. 8 more died and the rest were in the dark, buried in snow with little air to breathe for 3 days. In time, the snow would melt and the fuselage would again be sitting on top of the snow. The days passed and it survived by eating more of the dead. They smoked cigarettes and went out on little exploratory missions. But just after a few hundred miles, they'll be so tired. Later on one sojourn, they found the other part of the fuselage. Inside were batteries for the plane radio as well as some chocolates, a little candy and some comic books. They stayed there all night reading the comics by the light of the fire they had built. For a while, they had hope that they could use the batteries, but it soon became apparent that hooking up the radio with lots of wires was not something any of them possessed. The only option now was to walk right up the mountains. They were aware that Chile was west and remembered that the pilot had said they weren't far from their destination, but they had no idea of knowing that they were still 37 miles from the nearest road. So they decided they would stock up on human meat and only the strongest would go. On day 61, when the men set off, only 16 survivors remained alive. Some were sick and everyone was malnourished and beaten by the elements. Before they left, a man named Cartros Paz made them a sleeping bag with parts of the aircraft insulation sewn together with copper wire, which was very important because they would have frozen to death on their hike to freedom. It took them 3 days to climb the first mountain. They walked for days, almost passing out from exhaustion. But on the day 8 of their walk, they found a river. They saw green plants and most importantly, they saw a person on the other side of the river, though they were unable to cross to the other side to meet him. They slept there that night and the next morning, the man came back. He brought with him a piece of paper and a pen. He tied them to a rock and threw it across the river so they wrote on a paper, "We are survivors of the plane crash, we have no food, we cannot walk anymore and there's a lot of us in the mountain. Where are we?" And threw it back. The man went to find help. On the day 10, they finally picked them up by the army. Soon helicopters were used to find the others in the mountains. All were suffering from various ailments, but all of those who had been alive eventually recovered. Soon the news began to ask how they had survived so long without food. It was impossible. Then a photograph taken by the rescuers came to light of a human carcass whose bone had been striped. The survivors admitted what they had done and many in the public turned on them, calling them cannibal savages. But later they said, eating human flesh was not an easy decision. It was a last resort. We tried to strip off leather torn from the piece of luggage, though we knew that the chemical they would be treated with would do us more harm than good. It was either feast on the dead friends or die. And one survivor that was reluctant to turn into cannibalism actually died. But 16 of the survivors decided that they would do whatever it would to stay alive, and because of that, they were able to make it down the mountain. Soon the public had to understand their action and considered what they had done. So Project TellTales, imagine yourself being in that same condition. Would you have done the same to stay alive? I would like to see your comments below. See you next time on Project Telltales.